Storytime. Did he do it? I 16 female used to babysit for this family that lived a couple streets over from me. My mom would usually drop me off, but on this particular day she had to work. It wasn't a big deal since the family lived pretty close. I could walk. I didn't know it at the time, but walking is probably the reason I'm still here today. I usually leave my house and turn right because it's faster, but something was pulling me to the left, so I just went with it. About halfway through my walk I could see up ahead that there was an older guy walking towards me. I got really nervous, so I crossed the street, but as soon as I crossed he crossed too. Then he started waving his arms like he was trying to get my attention. I still had my guard up, but I also didn't want to be rude. I almost froze in place when we made eye contact and he called me by my first name. I had never seen this man before in my life, so I still have no idea how he knew my name or how he knew I was on the brink of living a nightmare. As soon as we were close enough, he reached out, grabbed my shoulders, and spoke in a low, serious tone that made me panic on the inside. He looked into my eyes without blinking one time and said, "When you get there, don't go in the closet." I was too afraid and confused to ask him what he was talking about, so I just watched him calmly walk away. I was still really freaked out, but I had a job to do, so I continued on my way to the family I was babysitting for. When I got there I had this feeling of dread, and I didn't know what, but I knew something was wrong. To my surprise, everything seemed fine, and at first babysitting was completely normal. I had almost put the creepy things that happened and what that guy said out of my mind when I started to hear banging coming from somewhere in the house. The kids were both asleep, and I was in the house alone, so I didn't know what it was. In horror, I realized the banging was coming from the closet, and everything I felt when I saw that man on the road came flooding back in. My mouth went dry, my legs felt like jello, and I wanted to run out of there, but I couldn't. I sat for an hour and listened to the banging coming from the closet until the kids' parents got back. I didn't know what I was leaving them to face, and warning them felt insane, so I just left. The next morning the entire street they lived on was blocked with crime scene tape. They found pieces of the entire family decorating the walls. I never saw the man that warned me again, but I still wonder, did he do it?
Storytime. I thought it was a mask. I love riding dirt bikes, and I love Halloween. So when my friend invited me over to ride dirt bikes in Halloween costumes, I was saying yes before he finished his question. I knew it would be a fun night showing what I knew and learning from other riders, but I was utterly mistaken. What happened that night still haunts my nightmares, and I'll never be able to look at a face the same again. We were all having a really good time. There were a bunch of other riders there I'd never met before, and I had no way of knowing what was about to happen. A group of about 6 of us decided we would take on the advanced trail, and that is what started the nightmare. There was one kid, Jake, who didn't seem ready for the advanced trail, but we all figured it would be fine. The group of us lined up like usual and started off on the trail. I looked over just in time to see someone without a helmet, and then disaster struck. The next thing I knew, I was colliding with another bike and flying through the air. It was a bad accident, and somehow 4 of us managed to hit one another. I thought my arm was broken, and I could hear someone screaming not too far away. I looked around to see where everyone else was, and I saw him, a boy laying on the ground out cold with his face scary close to the spinning tire of a bike. I crawled over to him and let out a sigh of relief when I realized his mask was sliding off to the side. As I stretched out my hand to fix the mask, I realized it was soft and felt like a deflated balloon. The boy's face had made contact with the tire of the bike. Instead of just ripping off like you would expect, it pretty much detached from his skull and hung to the side. That's why I thought it was a mask.
Storytime. It was raw. Sushi has always been my favorite food group. I ate all kinds, and I would eat it any time of day. But after everything that happened with a local sushi restaurant, I'll never eat sushi again. It was about a year ago that my friends and I would go to this one sushi place every day for lunch. I would always get this mixed platter that came with raw and cooked sushi options. On this one day, I ordered my usual, but as soon as the waitress put it down in front of me, I knew something was off. For starters, it smelled really funny, but when I asked about it, the waitress said it was fine. On top of that, my friends made me feel like asking for a new one would be the fastest way to get food with gross extras. Any doubt I had disappeared when I took my first bite. It felt like my teeth were fighting to make it through something cold and slimy filled with sand. My mouth was overwhelmed with the taste of metal, and I began smelling something that made me gag. I didn't want to be complicated, so I took the food home and threw it in the fridge without thinking much of it. The very next morning after all of that happened, I got ridiculously sick. I was throwing up, I had a fever, and I basically couldn't get out of bed. After 2 days of not getting better, I went to the emergency room, and I never expected them to find what they did. It turned out I had trichinosis, but that wasn't the worst part. A month later, the sushi restaurant was shut down after a random health inspection. The chefs were caught using rats to cut costs. The worst part about all of it, the only way I could have gotten the sickness I did from the rat is if it was raw.
Story time, it got all over me. In middle school I broke all the rules, and so I was pretty much always in trouble. I'm not proud of everything I did at that time, but putting myself in all those high-stress situations is the only reason I survived the worst day of my life. I was just walking around one day when I came to this huge barn that seemed empty and abandoned. Of course, just looking at the outside wasn't enough. I needed to go inside. It took a minute to find a good way in, but when I did, I had no idea I was walking into a chilling reality. The first thing I noticed was how many flies there were. I remember thinking it was bizarre for there to be so many in an abandoned barn. I walked further into the barn, and besides the flies, I was thinking it could be a good place to hang out. That is until I found the first box. At first, I was curious, but when I reached out to open it up, I felt a wave of panic that I couldn't explain. I decided to leave the box alone and walk around some more. I wasn't looking for a hayloft, but I found a ladder, and thank goodness I did. I don't know what would have happened if I had not been in the hayloft when I was. As soon as I made it up the ladder, I noticed more boxes like the one I almost opened. I figured it was a sign, and I should finally open one, and I was going to, but that's when I heard it. A car pulled up to the barn, parked, and someone got out. I wasn't really doing anything wrong, but I knew I needed to hide like my life depended on it. I found out later that it did. I saw space underneath the boxes in the hayloft that I could fit under, so I tried to squeeze in the spot. When I did, I kicked the box, and what happened next would have made me run out of there if I could. Something or someone inside the box banged back, and before I could process what happened, I heard a man shout, "Shut up!" up there. My heart was racing, and I thought I might be sick when I heard the ladder creak. I just laid there under the box and tried not to breathe as I heard footsteps getting closer and closer. If I wasn't used to being in crazy situations, I would have lost it because it got worse. Whoever was up there with me dropped a huge bag right on the floor next to me. My heart sank when I heard my ringtone blaring, and couldn't have been more relieved when I realized it wasn't my phone. I listened as the man went back down the ladder and out of the barn. I waited a couple minutes, and then I got out of there as fast as I could. I was running away from the barn, and I finally noticed the bag that the man dropped on the floor was oozing a dark red liquid. It got all over me.
Story time, are you gonna eat that? I went to high school with this girl Taylor, and we weren't really friends, but we did sit at the same lunch table. There were 3 or 4 girls that Taylor talked to, and then I had my 3 friends that I talked to. Every day from the other side of the table I would hear one of Taylor's friends ask her, "Hey, are you gonna finish that?" The first couple of times I didn't think much of it, but then I realized this girl was asking Taylor every single day. I knew if someone was asking me that every day, I would eventually get annoyed, but Taylor didn't seem to mind. In fact, Taylor started bringing extra lunches, sometimes just in case the girl would ask. It all seemed really nice until we all learned the sick and twisted thing Taylor was doing. About 4 months after consistently asking Taylor for her lunches, the girl just stopped coming to school. At first no one noticed, but then they announced it in our homeroom classes, which was weird. To make it even weirder, a week after the girls stopped coming to school, the police were at our school every day talking to people, looking through lockers, and it was clear they were investigating something. We found out a couple days later that the girl was in a medically induced coma, and the police were positive that another student was to blame. We all thought nothing really came of the investigation, but then Taylor suddenly stopped coming to school. I thought maybe it had something to do with lunch, but there was no way any of us could have ever guessed how repulsive everything happening actually was. It turns out Taylor was sick of this girl asking for her lunches, and instead of just telling her no, Taylor was walking around busy roads searching for roadkill. She was bringing home everything she found, blending it up, seasoning it, and cooking it special just for this girl. Every time I think of all the things she must have eaten, my stomach turns. Just remember to always think twice before you ask someone, "Are you gonna eat that?" Story time, but he knows me. It's almost Halloween night and I'm terrified. No, it's not because of the typical stuff. Something really weird happened last year, and I can't shake the feeling that he's coming back on Halloween night. Halloween actually used to be my favorite holiday, but everything that happened last year changed that. It seemed like any other night. At first, I did my own trick or treating early, and then came back home to help my mom give out candy. We were sitting in the dining room when suddenly there were loud, desperate bangs coming from the front door. My mom got annoyed, thought it was teenagers, and flung the door open. She was right, it was teenagers, but the way they looked froze me in my tracks. There was a boy and a girl, both covered head to toe in blood. Their faces were black and blue, and the look of terror on their faces made me so nervous I felt sick. My mom wasn't buying it, and although the 2 teens were begging to come inside, over and over she told them to get off of the property. That's when the girl grabbed my mother's arm, looked her right in the eye, and the words that she uttered next still haunt me. 2 little words made my mom completely lose all the color in her face.